was a crazy movie because it was a great movie, but
Yeah.
it seemed like there was resistance to that movie,
Oh yeah, no, there was.
which I thought was very strange. There was like Hollywood resistance to that movie. Like people didn't like that you were making it. It seemed
no,
like.
yeah, there was a lot of opposition.
What if the story that shaped civilizations is only the surface of something far deeper? What if the event that split history in two still holds mysteries we've barely begun to confront? When Mel Gibson appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience with Joe Rogan, he didn't come to relive past success. He came to challenge assumptions about faith, about history, about what really happened 2,000 years ago. This wasn't just a conversation about filmmaking. It was about risk, resistance, and a belief so unshakable that Gibson was willing to stake everything on it. His wealth, his reputation, even his place in Hollywood. Before The Passion of the Christ became a global phenomenon, before it earned over $612 million worldwide on a $30 million budget, before churches filled theaters across America, it was a film the industry refused to touch. Studio after studio rejected it. Executives dismissed it. The verdict from Hollywood was clear. It would never work. They were wrong. And now, Gibson says the most controversial part of the story hasn't even been told yet. Subscribe now if you're ready for stories that challenge history, question the narrative, and explore the truth beyond the headlines. The premise sounded risky on paper, a depiction of the final 12 hours of Jesus Christ's life, filmed entirely in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew, with subtitles and an unflinching portrayal of crucifixion. The anticipated R rating alone scared executives, but the pushback wasn't only about profits, it was ideological. Gibson explained that in an industry dominated by secular, progressive voices, a serious and reverent portrayal of Christ's suffering was viewed as backward, even threatening. Rogan pointed out the irony. Hollywood champions open-mindedness, yet seemed unusually uncomfortable with Christianity. Then came the storm of controversy. Accusations of anti-Semitism erupted before the film even premiered. Some critics argued the portrayal of certain Jewish authorities could incite hatred. Organizations, including the Anti-Defamation League, publicly voiced concern. The debate intensified, threatening to eclipse the film itself. Gibson insisted the message was never about blame. It was about shared responsibility. He emphasized that Christ's suffering, in his view, represented the sins of all humanity. To make that point unmistakable, he inserted a powerful symbol into the film. The hand that drives the first nail into the cross is his own. It wasn't a random detail. It was a statement. We are all accountable. When studios refused distribution, Gibson made an extraordinary move. He funded the entire project himself, putting $30 million of his own money at stake. He filmed in southern Italy, trained actors in ancient languages, and committed to historical authenticity at every level, even when it terrified executives. He cast Jim Caviezel as Jesus, respected but not yet a household name. The violence was not toned down for comfort. This wasn't a sanitized Sunday school retelling. It was raw, harrowing, and difficult to watch. With no major studio backing, Gibson partnered with a small distributor and built momentum in an unconventional way, screening the film for pastors and church leaders, creating a grassroots wave of anticipation. It worked. On February 25th, 2004, Ash Wednesday, the film debuted. The opening weekend brought in $83.8 million. Within months, it had become the highest-grossing independent film ever made, and at the time, the top-earning R-rated film in US history. Churches filled theaters, audiences lined up around blocks. Critics were divided. Some praised its emotional weight, others condemned its brutality, but the cultural impact was undeniable. And behind the scenes, the filming itself became legendary. Shot in the Italian town of Matera and at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, the production endured freezing winds and harsh conditions. Caviezel, just 33 at the time, his initials famously GC, pushed himself through punishing scenes that blurred the line between acting and endurance. What began as a film Hollywood rejected turned into a global phenomenon no one could ignore. Gibson took a risk that could have destroyed him, and instead, it reshaped the industry conversation about faith-based storytelling. Love it or hate it, the story behind The Passion is about conviction under fire. It's about standing firm when every powerful voice tells you to back down. And whether you see it as divine inspiration or defiant determination, one thing is clear. This wasn't just a movie release, it was a cultural shockwave that's still being felt today. The following day, Mel Gibson reached out again, not to celebrate the casting, but to warn Jim Caviezel about the cost. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told him directly that taking this role could shut every door in Hollywood. "You might never work here again." Caviezel didn't hesitate. He answered with something that sounded less like career strategy and more like conviction. Everyone has a cross to carry. You either lift it up or it crushes you. He'd been asked to portray Jesus twice before, in a stage production and a TV project, and both times he walked away. But this was different. Gibson's vision wasn't polished or comfortable. It was raw, historically grounded, and unwilling to dilute the suffering. Caviezel believed this version aimed to confront the full weight of the story, not soften it for audiences. And that weight became very real during filming. While shooting the scourging scene, the protective board behind him was missed. Twice. The lashes landed for real, leaving a deep wound across his back. During the Via Dolorosa sequence, the heavy cross slipped and struck his head, forcing his face into the dirt. He bit through his tongue in the fall. The blood visible in the scene wasn't makeup. His shoulder was dislocated from carrying the cross, an injury that lingered through the remainder of production. The crucifixion scenes were filmed in punishing winter conditions in Matera, Italy. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Winds whipped across the exposed cliffs, and Caviezel hung nearly motionless for hours. He developed hypothermia, then pneumonia, followed by a persistent lung infection. The prosthetic makeup that distorted one eye removed his depth perception, triggering severe migraines and making every movement more dangerous. By the end of the shoot, he had lost significant weight and was in constant pain. But the most shocking moment came on the final day. During the last shot, while filming the Sermon on the Mount sequence, lightning struck. Caviezel later described feeling electricity surge through him. Producer Steve McAvity witnessed the bolt hit Caviezel, with a second fork striking assistant director Jan Michelini nearby. It was reportedly the second lightning strike Michelini had experienced during production. Caviezel later said he saw flashes like fire around his head, and the crowd watching reacted with a sound he described as primal and unforgettable. In the years that followed, he underwent multiple heart surgeries related to complications that emerged after the strike, including an open heart procedure. In 2023, he publicly revealed that during one operation, he briefly died on the table before being revived. When asked what affected him most about filming The Passion of the Christ, he hinted that some experiences were too personal to fully explain. Gibson later reflected, during his appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, that the project transformed people in ways none of them anticipated. Several cast and crew members spoke about profound spiritual changes during production. Was it simply the intensity of the material, the psychological toll of reenacting such suffering, or something harder to define? Gibson doesn't dismiss the mystery. He sees it as part of something bigger. His faith has never been casual or surface level. A committed traditional Catholic, Gibson openly supports the Latin Mass and speaks candidly about the shortcomings he perceives within institutional religion. On Rogan's podcast, he didn't limit his criticism to Hollywood. He addressed corruption within the Catholic Church itself, scandals that have shaken believers worldwide. One example often cited is the case of Theodore McCarrick, the former Cardinal and Archbishop of Washington, who was laicized in 2019 after decades of allegations of abuse and misconduct. For Gibson, situations like this aren't just administrative failures. They represent a deeper moral collapse within an institution meant to uphold spiritual integrity. Yet he draws a clear distinction. The Church, as a spiritual body, its teachings, sacraments, and centuries-old beliefs, is not the same as the flawed human structure that governs it. He doesn't reject the institution, he challenges it. In his view, demanding accountability is not rebellion, it's devotion. That perspective resonates with many believers who feel disillusioned by leadership scandals while holding firmly to their faith. Gibson gives voice to that tension. He speaks as someone deeply committed, not detached. On Rogan's show, this worldview naturally extended into something even larger. For Gibson, the battles he faced making The Passion weren't only financial or cultural, they were spiritual. He sees history, faith, and even modern controversies through a lens of light versus darkness, redemption versus corruption. You don't have to share that framework to recognize the intensity behind it. Rogan didn't try to argue him out of it. He listened, questioned, and let him explain. And according to Gibson, the most important part of the story isn't the backlash in Hollywood or even the scandals within the church. It's what he believes happened in a tomb in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, and why that event still shakes the world today. Evidence of the resurrection. There was a point in the conversation when the tone shifted. You could almost sense it through the screen. Mel Gibson and Joe Rogan had spent over an hour weaving through Hollywood politics, church controversy, and the making of the Passion of the Christ. But eventually, Rogan steered the discussion to the claim at the very core of Christianity, the resurrection. The one event that either validates the entire faith or brings it crashing down. Gibson didn't hesitate. He said he views the Gospels not as symbolic literature or moral allegory, but as documented history. In his words, they describe real events. He pointed out that references to Jesus exist outside the Bible in ancient historical sources, arguing that the figure himself isn't a mythological invention. Then the conversation moved to the Shroud of Turin, one of the most debated religious artifacts in the world. Gibson mentioned updated analysis that challenges earlier claims, labeling it a medieval fake. Rogan leaned in, clearly intrigued. Scientists still can't fully explain how the image on the cloth was formed. It isn't paint. It isn't dye. No known artistic technique accounts for it. Some researchers have theorized that the image appears consistent with a sudden, intense burst of energy, something modern technology has struggled to reproduce. Whether one believes it authentic or not, the shroud remains one of history's most puzzling objects. But the argument Gibson emphasized most wasn't about cloth or carbon dating. It was about people. After the crucifixion, he said, The followers of Jesus had every reason to disappear. Their teacher had been executed publicly by Rome. Associating with him was dangerous. The logical move would have been to scatter, deny involvement, and save themselves. Instead, according to early Christian tradition, many of them endured persecution and execution without renouncing their claims. Gibson's point wasn't theological, it was psychological. People will lie to avoid suffering. That's human instinct. But willingly facing imprisonment or death for something you know is false, that's harder to explain. In his view, something must have happened that transformed fearful followers into unshakable witnesses. Rogan acknowledged that the resurrection is the most difficult part for modern audiences to accept. Gibson agreed immediately. It demands the greatest leap of belief. At one point, Gibson posed a blunt question: who publicly dies and then returns 3 days later by his own power? He wasn't framing it as a joke or an attack on other traditions, just stating what he personally believes happened. In an era where public figures carefully hedge every opinion, the directness stood out. Rogan didn't argue. He didn't pivot away. He let the statement hang there, and that silence carried weight. Just days earlier, Rogan had hosted Wesley Huff to discuss historical arguments surrounding Jesus. 2 consecutive episodes exploring Christianity on the Joe Rogan Experience, the most listened to show in the world, sparked widespread conversation. Gibson expanded further, describing reality in spiritual terms. Forces of good and evil in conflict over humanity's soul. For him, that framework explains everything, from resistance he faced in Hollywood to scandals within religious institutions, to why he believes telling the resurrection story matters now more than ever. The clip spread rapidly online, not because it was sensational, but because it was sincere. In a digital world saturated with irony and detachment, here was someone speaking with unfiltered conviction. The response wasn't ridicule, it was reflection. Comment sections filled with people sharing doubts, faith journeys, and questions they'd rarely voiced publicly. It resonated because it touched something many carry quietly. The next chapter. Gibson also confirmed he's developing a sequel titled The Resurrection of the Christ. Unlike the first film's straightforward narrative, this project is far more ambitious. He said the script took years to complete, crafted alongside his brother and Randall Wallace, known for writing Braveheart. Gibson described the screenplay as unlike anything he's read before, layered, complex, and challenging, even for him to execute. Where the passion followed a linear timeline centered on suffering, this sequel aims to explore events beyond the tomb in a way that stretches both storytelling and theology. He admitted it may be the most demanding, creative endeavor of his life. And whether someone approaches the subject with belief, doubt, or simple curiosity, one thing is certain. The conversation he sparked isn't fading, it's only getting louder. The original film focused on the final 12 hours of Jesus' life. Betrayal, suffering, trial, and crucifixion told in a stark, chronological march toward Golgotha. It was intimate, grounded, and relentless in its realism. But the sequel? It won't resemble that structure at all. When Mel Gibson spoke with Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience, he explained that telling the resurrection story properly means going far beyond a garden tomb at sunrise. In his view, you can't understand the resurrection without going all the way back to the fall of the angels. That pushes the narrative into an entirely different realm, into Sheol, into the unseen. According to Gibson, the story stretches from the rebellion of angels to the death of the last apostle. It won't unfold in a straight line. It moves across time, across spiritual dimensions, across realities that mainstream cinema rarely attempts to visualize. In a 2022 interview, he described the challenge as placing the resurrection at the center while weaving around it the past, the future, and other realms of existence. He admitted it ventures into territory that feels almost otherworldly, nearly science fiction in scale. Jim Caviezel is expected to return as Jesus. Because nearly 2 decades have passed since the Passion of the Christ, Gibson plans to use advanced CGI de-aging technology to maintain continuity. The sequel's events occur just 3 days after the crucifixion. Some original cast members may also return with similar digital treatment. Filming is anticipated to take place in Italy again, though production timelines are still being finalized with hopes of beginning in 2026. Caviezel has been bold in his expectations, stating publicly that he believes this could become the most significant film ever made, not just within the religious genre, but overall. And consider the cinematic scope alone: the fall of angels, the descent into Sheol from ancient Hebrew cosmology, the harrowing of hell, and the resurrection depicted not as a quiet moment in a garden, but as a cosmic rupture, an event that tears open the boundary between life and death. Gibson has reportedly been contemplating how to portray these scenes for more than a decade. What he's made clear is that he doesn't envision a soft focus, gently lit retelling. He's aiming for something vast, something metaphysical. But beyond the spectacle are the questions the film will inevitably raise. If the resurrection occurred, what does that imply about reality itself? About mortality? About whether this physical world is the whole story? And if it didn't occur, why were early followers willing to suffer and die rather than retract their testimony? What convinced them so completely? These are not light questions, and Gibson doesn't appear interested in offering light answers. There's no official start date yet. Pre-production still needs to take shape, but the script, by Gibson's account, is complete. The concept is locked in. And given what happened when Hollywood once dismissed the first film as unmarketable, it might be premature to underestimate him again. So the journey continues. This isn't only about cinema anymore. It's about history, belief, the boundary between legend and lived reality. What if the story many have been taught to question is the very one demanding a second look? What if the next chapter doesn't just revisit the past, but reframes how we see existence itself? If Gibson brings this vision to the screen, it won't just be a sequel. It could be a moment that challenges audiences to rethink everything they thought they understood.